is a gentleman that we are going to talk tonight about. If you see, if you look, his red hair, and he paints himself as red hair in all of his paintings. But as you see, he has kind of a tormented face, doesn't it? And as you will see in a moment, his face is more like his mother than his father. Let me show you another portrait of him, which I like better than this one. It's the one that was used for the original edition of the book. And there he's a little more relaxed, but again, you see the red hair. Vincent Van Gogh was the son of the Reverend Theodore Van Gogh, who was 29 years of age at the time that he got married. His wife was a lady by the name of Anna Cornelia Carventus, and she was older, 32 years. This is important, because that's when they got married, and this is late for the times that we are talking about, and of course they were worried about conceiving children and all that. That's his father, but as you see, the first square, this is Vincent's face, black here, yeah, and wider. That's the Reverend Theodorus and Anna Cornelia. The Van Goghs were a distinguished family. His paternal grandfather was a well-known pastor in Amsterdam. An uncle was an admiral of the Dutch fleet, and three others were very well-known art dealers, such as Uncle Haim, Uncle Cornelius in Brussels, and Uncle Vincent. The latter was a partner in the art dealer house of Goupil and Company, with offices in Paris, Brussels, London, Amsterdam, The Hague, and New York. We are talking of the 1850s. This was a very important art dealer concern. Our painter, Vincent Van Gogh, was named after this uncle, whom he was supposed to inherit, since Uncle Vincent had no children of his own and was the closest brother to his father, the Reverend Theo. Theo, the father, and Vincent, the painter's uncle, were very close. And in a way, Van Gogh was, our painter was destined to inherit this man, which was incredibly wealthy, as you would imagine. Now, this Uncle Vincent had no children. The circumstances of his birth were most peculiar and influenced the painter all through his life. This is what happened. On March 30 of 1852, a child named Vincent Van Gogh was born, but this child was stillborn or died a few days after birth. It's not certain what happened, but he died. Was either stillborn or died quickly. A year later, on exactly the same month and day, that is March 30, 1853, another boy was born to this family. He too was named Vincent Van Gogh, like his dead brother. This was to be our painter. He was to see his own name inscribed on the grave of his brother every day of his childhood and adolescence, since that grave was situated by the entrance of his father's church. And of course he visited there daily. Vincent was thus a replacement child. As such, he could never compete for his parents' affection, since the dead one was now perfect, in fact, an angel in heaven. Further, there was to be in his parents' house forever an empty chair, that of his brother. And this is very important, keep it in mind. You will see why in a moment. Now you will imagine that in a religious family like these people were, that boy was a terrible loss to them, because they were elderly. This woman was 33 by the time that she delivered the child, and in those days it was not like now. People didn't live as long, and the possibilities of conception were not always the same. Perhaps it is for that reason that at a tragic point in his life he had painted two famous empty chairs, his own and Gauguin's empty chair, whom he thought of killing, planning to commit suicide shortly afterwards. Further, he frequently wrote in his letters about the tragedy of those that had died leaving behind empty chairs. Vincent collected drawings of empty chairs and paintings all of his life. So empty chairs were important to him and were related to the death of his brother, which he articulated innumerable times. We have a lot of information, I need to tell you, because Vincent wrote, as I told you, for about a period of 9 years, in daily letters to his brother. They were more like newspapers than letters. They were extensive letters where he described everything he did, everything he painted, everything practically he thought. And they are collected. There are two enormous volumes of letters, which are certainly very interesting. Another example of the influence of the death of his brother was the compulsion that was to last all of his life to attend the funeral of boys unknown to him whenever he heard of one such death. When he was 25, Vincent was a witness to a very sad incident by which he was very much impressed. It happened that one child fell into the water of an Amsterdam canal. Vincent felt compelled to accompany the two chief doctors sent by his uncle, the admiral, to help the little boy that unfortunately had died. He followed the men who tried in vain to bring the small child back to life. Meanwhile, the father had recognized his son's body and the little corpse was carried home. Though he didn't know these people at all, he felt the need during the evening to return to the home. He wrote to his brother Theo, quote, "That evening I went to see the people once more. It was already dark in the house. The little body was lying so still on a bed in the little parlor. He was such a pretty little boy." He continues, "The sorrow was great. He had been the light of the house, as it were, and the light had now been extinguished. Though rough people express their sorrow crudely and without dignity like this mother, one still feels deeply in a house of mourning, and the spell remained with me the whole evening while I took a long walk." End of quote. As a substitute child, and there are, innumerable papers, not innumerable, there are some papers written about substitute childs, and they always have enormous problems because of the difficulties in bonding, particularly when they are born relatively quickly after the one that had died. There are problems of bonding between the mother and the child, the parents and the child, particularly the mother. And of course the child has to live to an idea of a dead kid that is now in heaven and doesn't do anything wrong, doesn't have to be disciplined, etc. And that's difficult to do. So as a substitute child, he never managed to replace this dead brother. For the same reason his mother and father couldn't bond with him normally. Indeed, his mother never thought much of her son's painting. Thus, when she moved from Nuene, a village where they lived, in 1885, a year after her husband's death, a group of Vincent's paintings were packed in cases and left behind. She totally forgot them, with the result that the local carpenter in whose care they were left sold everything after several years to a junk dealer. They have never been found, though a lot of people have been looking for them. Vincent was a strange child who liked fishing, looking for birds, nests, and hunting beetles, of which he made orderly collections. People frequently remark about his strangeness. He was already somewhat withdrawn and frequently solitary. From the age of 7 onwards, he did some drawings and watercolors that closely resemble, in some cases, the style of his mother's drawing and may well have been copied from them. At 8, he modeled a clay elephant that was highly praised by the family, a fact that greatly disturbed the little boy to such an extent that he destroyed it. The drawing of a cat underwent a similar fate for the same reasons. Thus, since his childhood, he was unable to tolerate praise, and that will last him a lifetime. Vincent had 5 siblings, 3 sisters and 2 brothers. Theo, which is the most important one in the case of Vincent, was 4 years younger than Vincent, but soon became the favorite of the parents, and much later was to become the only source of moral and economic support Vincent was to have. Theo not only encouraged him to take drawing and oil paintings when Vincent was at a loss in the world, but he really believed in Vincent's talents. Without his brother's devotion and support, Vincent couldn't have become a painter. Indeed, he could not have survived. As it was, and thanks to his brother Theo's help, Vincent's frenzy to paint was his only reason to live. But long before he started painting, at 16, he was sent to The Hague to become an art dealer like his uncle Vincent, who he was supposed to inherit, whose considerable fortune and business he was supposed to inherit. That was before the family disowned him. For several years he was very much complimented for his friendliness to art clients, and his future as an art dealer seemed very, very bright indeed. At 20, against his will, he was moved to the house of Goupil in London. Now, Vincent never took well to separation. He reacted badly to them. From The Hague, he could go back home nearly every week or every 2 weeks, so he was in close contact with his parents and his family. Once he went to London, of course, that became a real impossibility, and that really disturbed him very seriously. You start to see him showing some signs that things are not quite right. So he was moved to the house of Goupil in London, and there, after a disappointment in love, he started to become rude to the customers and to criticize their taste about pictures. In the end, nobody wanted any dealings with the Dutch peasant. In marked contrast with the Hague period, when everybody was delighted with him. Shortly afterwards, he told his employers that the art business was nothing but an organized racket, and was fired from the house of Goupil and Company. He then found employment as a teacher in a religious school in London. During this period, a friend described how one afternoon, while going for a walk, Vincent suddenly saw a deserted, miserable, street dog. He looked in his pocket and found 2 pennies. They were all the money he had left, since it was near the end of the month. He bought 2 rolls with 1 penny to give to the dog, and stood looking at the animal full of complacency. The animal, being hungry, devoured the bread in an instant. Vincent went back to his companion and said, quote, "What do you think this animal told me just now? That he would like another couple of rolls like that." And following his impulse, he bought 2 more and gave them to the genuine dog. This friend commented that at that point, Vincent didn't have money to buy himself even a pack of tobacco, his only luxury, let alone any food. At 24 years, what is called his religious mania period started. He now wanted to follow in the father's footsteps. He admired his father at this point like you wouldn't believe. Next to God was his father, but pretty close to God, on the right-hand side of him. So on Sunday, for example, he used to go to several times to church, to the Dutch Reformed, the Jansenists, the Roman Catholic, and the Lutherans. A friend once expressed his astonishment at this behavior. Vincent answered with a pleasant smile, quote, "Do you really think, my friend, that God cannot be found in the other churches?" And he memorialized everything that he did. Now, in those days, he was obsessed with becoming a preacher, and what he was doing is translating the Bible. That's the Bible, and this is a dictionary, and he spoke several languages. He was trying to translate the Bible into several languages and using a dictionary, and that's a painting from the early days, not at this point, he was not painting, but later on he painted that. Soon his religious passion took him to the University of Amsterdam, where he attempted to be formally trained as a pastor. At this time in his life, his father was a quasi-god for him. As the time of the examination got closer, Vincent's anxiety increased. He said, quote, "For me things," this is in a letter to his brother, "for me things are becoming more and more serious as the examination draws nearer. It certainly is very doubtful that I shall ever succeed. I mean, shall ever pass all the examinations," end of quote. In the end, he gave up this effort. According to his teacher, Dr. Mendes de Costa, Vincent, after a reasonably good start, was beaten by the Greek verbs. He would say, "Mendes," and this is a quote, "do you seriously believe that such horrors are indispensable to a man who wants to do what I want to do, give peace to poor creatures and reconcile them to their existence here on earth?" End of quote. Mendes da Costa, his teacher, further remarks that Vincent was at this time in the habit of punishing himself whenever he felt he had neglected a duty. He did so by using a whip against his back and by lying on the floor of a little wooden shed without bed or blanket during the winter. He would frequently be seen without an overcoat during cold weather as another form of punishment. After this failure at formal training, he tried to become a lay evangelist preacher, asking to be sent to the poorest mining areas in Belgium. He was given a position on a 6-month trial basis with a salary of 50 francs a month. Once there, he gave away everything he had to the poor, the sick and the needy. His clothes, his shoes, even his bed. He moved into a simple wooden hut, sleeping on a straw over the bare boards. The church authorities found his behavior too good and too eccentric. They were alarmed at his disreputable looks that they thought diminished the dignity of his position. Vincent was reprimanded several times by the church authorities, but not even his father, that he so admired at this point, could convince him of the need to compromise with them. In the end, of course, he was dismissed. An old pastor who knew Vincent at this time said of him, "His Dutch cleanliness was singularly abandoned. Soap was banished as a wicked luxury. And when our evangelist was not wholly covered with a layer of coal dust, his face was usually dirtier than that of the miners. Mysterious details didn't trouble him." The old pastor further remarked on Vincent's profound sensitivity that extended to all living creatures. He was told by the family with whom Vincent worked that whenever he found a caterpillar on the ground in the garden, he carefully went to it, picked it up, and took it to a tree, so the caterpillar will be safe. But this was only one side of this high-minded man. The other side, that surfaced frequently enough, was quite different. It was careless, argumentative, demanding, inconsiderate, opinionated, ungrateful, and too fond of drinking, which he too memorialized. These people are drinking absinthe, which is a form of drink that existed in those days. It's made of, it's wood alcohol really, and it's now, of course, not ever used because it brings damage you. So he drank enormous amount of absinthe. Except for his brother, no one could tolerate him for very long. Now ensues a long period of increasing alienation from his family, during which he grew bitterly angry at them, and particularly more so at his father. And the family started to call him an idler, and his brother wrote to him a letter saying that he was going down in the world, and that was very, very offensive to him. Vincent, in fact, was a man of very, very many talents, not only as a painter. As you will see, I will read you a letter, and you will see that it is a wonderful written letter, and even more important for people that are in the field of mental health, is the best description of a working inhibition that I have ever read in my life. It's just beautiful. So he has received this letter from his brother, calling him an angler, and going down on the world. I'm not going to read you the full letter, but I'm going to start at a certain point. And he says to his brother, "As molting time, when they change their feathers, is for birds, so adversity or misfortune is the difficult time for us human beings. One can stay in it in that time of molting. One can also emerge renewed. But anyhow, it must not be done in public, and it is not at all amusing. Therefore, the only thing to do is to hide oneself. Well, so be it." He expresses a wish for reconciliation, quote, "Now, though it is very difficult, almost impossible to regain the confidence of a whole family, which is not quite free from prejudice and other qualities as fashionable and honorable, I do not quite despair that by and by, slowly but surely, a cordial understanding may be renewed between some of us. And in the very first place, I should like to see that entente cordial, not to put it stronger, re-established between father and me. And I desire not less to see it reestablished between us two. An entente cordial is infinitely better than misunderstandings." He now shows, that's the end of the quote, he shows a great deal of insight into some of his difficulties. Unfortunately, his awareness of such difficulties and their consequence doesn't help him to behave different, to control himself any better. This is what he says, and this is a quote. "I am a man of passions, capable of and subject to doing more or less foolish things, which I happen to repent more or less afterwards. Now and then I speak and act too hastily, when it would have been better to wait patiently. I think other people sometimes make the same mistakes. Well, this being the case, what is to be done? Must I consider myself a dangerous man, incapable of anything? I don't think so. But the problem is to try every means to put those self-same passions to good use." End of quote. He's still hurt by what his brother called his going down, his doing nothing. It is important to notice that at this point, he still has no definite aim of his own as to his future, and though he reads and draws a certain amount, he has not yet decided formally to become a painter at all. This step was in the end to be taken at Theo's suggestion, and for the sake of the entente cordial with him. The letter continued, quote, "Now for more than 5 years, I do not know exactly how long, I have been more or less without employment, wandering here and there. You say, since a certain time, you have gone down, you have deteriorated, you have not done anything. Is this quite true? It is true that occasionally I have earned my crust of bread. Occasionally a friend has given it to me in charity. I have lived as I could, as luck will have it, haphazardly. It is true that I have lost the confidence of many. It is true that my financial affairs are in a sad state. It is true the future is only too gloomy. It is true that I might have done better. It is true that I have lost time in terms of earning my bread. It is true that even my studies are in a rather sad and hopeless condition, and that my needs are greater, infinitely greater, than my possessions. But is this what you call going down? Is this what you call doing nothing? You will perhaps say, but why did you not continue as they wanted you to? They wanted you to go through the university. My only answer is, The expenses were too heavy, and besides, that future was not much better than the one on the road now before me. But I must continue on the path I have taken now. If I don't do anything, if I don't study, if I don't go on seeking any longer, I am lost. Then woe is me. That is how I look at it. To continue, that is what is necessary. But you will ask, what is your definite aim? That aim becomes more definite, will stand out slowly and surely, as a rough draft becomes sketch and the sketch becomes a picture. Little by little, by working seriously on it, by pondering over the idea, vague at first, over the thought that was fleeting and passing till it gets fixed. End of quote. He takes exception to his brother saying that since they worked together a year earlier near the old canal and milk at Ridgewood, Vincent has changed so much that he is not the same anymore. He responds to that statement in the following way, quote, well, that is not quite true. What has changed is that my life then was less difficult and my future seemed less dark, but the inner state, my way of looking at things and my way of thinking has not changed. If there has been any change at all, it is that I think and believe and love more seriously now what I already thought and believed and loved then. So you must not think that I disavow things. I am rather faithful in my unfaithfulness, and though changed, I am the same. My only anxiety is how can I be of use in the world? Can I serve some purpose and be of any good? How can I learn more and study certain subjects profoundly? You see, that is what preoccupies me constantly. And then I feel imprisoned by poverty, excluded from participating in certain work, that means religious work, and certain necessities are beyond my reach. End of quote. He comes back to the very painful point of his being an idler and writes what is perhaps, as I told you, one of the most beautiful passages in his letter, as well as the best description of a neurotic inhibition of work of which I am aware. This is a quote. I write somewhat at random whatever comes to my pen. I should be very glad if you could see in me something more than an idle fellow, because there are two kinds of idleness, which are a great contrast to each other. There is the man who is idle from laziness and from lack of character, from the baseness of his nature. If you like, you may take me for such a one. On the other hand, there is the idle man who is idle in spite of himself, who is inwardly consumed by a great longing for action, but does nothing, because it is impossible for him to do anything, because he seems to be imprisoned in some cage, because he doesn't possess what he needs to become productive, because circumstances bring him inevitably to that point. Such a man does not always know what he could do, but he instinctively feels, I'm good for something, my life has a purpose after all, I know that I could be quite a different man. How can I be useful? Of what service can I be? There is something inside me. What can it be? This is quite a different kind of idle mind. If you like, you may take me for such a one. Now it continues, and this is a very beautiful, moving passage. A caged bird in spring knows quite well that he might serve some end. He is well aware that there is something for him to do, but he can't do it. What is it? He doesn't quite remember, but he cannot do it. Then some vague ideas occur to him, and he says to himself, the others build their nests and lay their eggs and bring up their little ones. And he knocks his head against the bars of the cage, but the cage remains and the bird is maddened by anguish. Look at that lazy animal, says another bird passing. He seems to be living at ease. Yes, the prisoner lives, he doesn't die. There are no outward signs of what passes within him. His health is good, is more or less gay when the sun shines. But then the season of migration comes and attacks of melancholia. But he has everything he wants, say the children that tend him in his cage. He looks through the bars at the overcast sky where a thunderstorm is gathering, and inwardly he rebels against his fate. I'm caged, and you tell me I do not want anything, fools? You think I have everything I need? Oh, I beseech your liberty, that I may be a bird like other birds. A certain idle man resembles that idle bird. That is, I think, a very moving letter, and it shows you how talented he was. That's a beautifully written letter. I mean, it's remarkable. Now, Theo, that letter was, of course, written with the aim of trying to reconcile with his family, particularly with his brother, Theo. And he achieved that aim. Theo was moved by it. Theo felt very guilty about Van Gogh because he has taken the favored son place in the family, which he didn't seek, but was given to him, though he was 4 years younger. And remember, in those days that did not happen. You were the oldest, the child, you were who had an authority that your younger siblings did not have. Of course, Vincent never achieved that. And so Theo was feeling some guilt about all of this. And then, he was compassionate and was looking at his brother and the conditions in which he had been living and the many disasters that had taken place in his life. And so, looking at his brother's miserable condition, he came to his rescue and started to support him economically at an enormous sacrifice to himself. Shortly afterwards, and this was the only source of income of Vincent Van Gogh, his brother's allowance. Shortly afterwards, Theo, after seeing a couple of drawings done by his brother, encouraged him to continue to draw. He sent Vincent books about drawing and painting, and later on pushed him to use oil. This was the beginning of his apprenticeship. And Theo had a heck of a time to get him to move from drawing into painting with oil. He had to push him real hard. Afterwards, then Vincent moved to The Hague, where he continued painting. He was now 29 years old. Remember, he's going only to live 37 years. He was 29 years old and quickly involved himself with a low-class prostitute called Christina, or Sin, having her move with him so that she will have a home. And that's Christina, that's a little baby. She was a prostitute, but beyond being a prostitute, she was really not a good person. And had a very bad family, and they were very exploitative for the very little resources that Vincent had. He wanted to rescue her and her child through marriage. He wanted to marry her. He accused his brother angrily of callousness because the latter didn't want to increase his economic support at this time. You can imagine his family reaction to this. The bitterness, and it was a long time before he could acknowledge the unreliability of Christine. By then, he was very sick with gonorrhea and syphilis, which is all he got really from this lady. By then, too, the love of his father had turned into hate. Now, this man that was a quasi-God for him, as close to God as you can conceive of, became a sort of devil incarnate, and he hated him cordially. His father's death happened suddenly, very suddenly, in 1885, after a bitter argument with Vincent. These arguments were common between his father and Vincent, and the father, they had this very bad argument. The father went for a walk, obviously returned very quickly to the house and dropped just in the entrance of the house, just in front of Vincent. This was memorialized by him with a small still life, which included his father's tobacco pouch and his pipe. I don't have that painting, so I can't show it to you. I used to have it, but I don't know what I did with it. It's a little, like a little round table that has a base with flowers, and in the front of the table, in the corner, there is a tobacco pouch and a pipe. His father's tobacco pouch and his pipe. He sent this to Theo as a memento of his father's death, and that was all there was to it. At the age of 32, he decided to join the Academy of Painting at Antwerp with Theo's approval. The news of Vincent's arrival spread like a wildfire at the Academy. Quote, some sort of savage had dropped in, the student said. A pupil in the drawing class remarked, quote, I remember quite well that weather-beaten, nervous, restless man who crashed like a bombshell into the Antwerp Academy, upsetting the director, the drawing masters, and the pupils. End of quote. He painted, quote, feverishly, furiously, with a rapidity that stupefied his fellow student. His colors literally dripped from his canvas onto the floor. End of quote. When the teacher saw his work, he demoted Vincent to the drawing class. Shortly afterwards, in one of the drawing classes, the students were presented with a cast of the Venus or the Milo to copy. Vincent strongly accentuated the breadth of the hips, made them very, very big. Again, when the teacher saw this, he tore Van Gogh drawing with the furious corrective strokes of his crayon, reminding his pupil of the inviolable canons of his art. End of quote. Vincent flew into a rage, as he was given to do, and said, quote, so you don't know what a young woman is like? God damn you. A woman must have hips and buttocks and a pelvis in which she can hold a child. End of quote. This was the last lesson Vincent ever took, or perhaps one should say, gave at the Antwerp Academy. A very productive period followed that took him to the famous Yellow House in the south of France, in a little town called Ars, where for a short time he was joined by Gauguin, who had just returned from the Pacific Islands. Let me show it to you. That's the Yellow House. This here in the corner is a Yellow House where he lived. Vincent, Theo paid the rent. And here is a cafe that appears in another very famous painting. And this is interesting. Vincent, you have these ideas that in that house that was a little too big for him, there could be like a community of painters, like in a monastery. They will come together like they were monks, and the abbot of these painters of the monastery of painters will be Gauguin, which he admired greatly. He thought Gauguin was the greatest painter in the world. So, of course, when he was doing some of these paintings, as you see, this is in the evening, right? And of course, there are no electric lights or lamps or anything like that, and you will see in the Starry Night the same thing. He will go and stand himself, let's say, in this corner over here with an enormous hat that he will fill with candles so that he can illuminate the canvas. And of course, in this little village, because he was very peculiar and behaved in a very strange manner and was doing all of this, they were very concerned about Vincent. They thought he was crazy and eccentric and the rest of it. In any case, Gauguin came to live with him because he had returned from the South Pacific Island, and Theo was Gauguin's dealer and put a lot of pressure on him to go and live with Vincent, and so he did that. That's the Yellow House then. It's a very famous place. Now, let me show you this one, which is the cafe that I showed you earlier. And if you, he painted that standing obviously over here, and that's the Yellow House on the back. That door is the Yellow House, is behind all of this. So that's that cafe. Let me show you Vincent's bedroom in the yellow house. You see it's very rustic place. Look at the chairs. And the rustic chair, peasant-like chairs, and the floor is wood. The paintings, the walls are not particularly painted, though he has hung some drawings on it and things of that kind. Let me move on and show you another painting. When Gauguin was coming, Vincent started to paint like a dozen of these sunflowers. And the reason for that was to decorate the walls of Gauguin's room. And he really, as you will see in a moment, decorated Gauguin's room, painted the wall, put a carpet in the floor, bought very fine furniture for Gauguin. And this sunflower, as you will see in a little while, one of them, I don't know if this was the exact one, sold a few years ago for $40.5 million. So Vincent quarreled with Gauguin, wanting to hurt him with a razor. At the last moment he changed his mind and instead cut his own earlobe, the lower part of it, which he carefully wrapped in cotton and took as a present to Rachel, a prostitute that was friendly to him at the local bordel. That's where Gauguin was going when he was following him. I don't need to tell you that this woman was horrified. He was, of course, bleeding and looking like anything that you can think of. Now, let me show you his chairs. This is his empty chair. Belongs into his room. You saw it before. And here is the pipe, the smoke, you remember? Here is a pouch of tobacco. You remember that was what he painted when his father died. Now you look back here, and I generally call your attention to this as a curiosity. I don't know how well you can see it. He signed his name here, Vincent, which he rarely did by now because he was so angry with his family, particularly his father, that he thought that he was famous. He didn't want to partake in that fame and all. And he further had the fantasy that his style will develop in such a way that he wouldn't have to sign his paintings, that people will recognize them just by looking at them, which indeed is true. Nowadays, you see a Van Gogh, you know it's a Van Gogh. Okay? Let me call you attention to the fact that here there are some onions that probably has meaning, but at this point is irrelevant in my talk. But you see the V, it's a V, round V, like that, there. Then Vincent. In the past, up to this painting, all his V's were like this, ending in a very sharp, angle right here. That one is rounded. Now, analysts usually said, well, that has something to do with the cutting of his hair and castrating himself, in a way, feeling himself now castrated. In any case, that's his chair. Show you the same painting. It's his chair, but you don't see the V there. It's the same painting though, and this is more like the original at the Tate Gallery. It has more the colors of the painting of the Tate Gallery, but you see the pipe there perhaps a little better than there. Now I told you that Gauguin's chair was a lot more elegant. See, that was a fine chair, has a cushion here. The walls are painted, there are lights there, there is a carpet in the floor, which indeed was true. He did that for Gauguin, and he put in the walls, which is not depicted here, 12 of the 8 or 10 or 12 of the sunflowers. If you look at this, there is a candle, a lighted candle here. And here, there are some books God knows what it is at this point, but that's it. Now what I'm going to do is put them together so that you can compare them, and I'm going to behave like an analyst does when a patient brings you a dream. In fact, I will treat these two paintings as if they were dreams full of symbols. And that is a mysterious thing for many people's mind. What do analysts do with dreams? Are they crazy and so on? And I hope that this will illustrate how simple it is and how much sense it makes. So Vincent is my patient, my psychoanalytic patient, comes one day to me and says, Dr. Nagera, I had the most peculiar dreams last night. And you say, oh really, what was it? He said, well, it's interesting. I painted two empty chairs, one besides the other. You know? And one of them I can recognize as my chair. It's in my room. And it has a pouch of tobacco here and the pipe. And the other one is different. It's a finer chair. And you know, it has a candle, a lighted candle on it, and some novels. Right? So what an analyst then does is he divides this into its component parts. And you will ask him, well, what about the chair? Well, he already told you that it was his chair and it was in his room and so on. You say, well, but there is a tobacco pouch and a pipe. And he would say, well, you know, you probably know that I have smoked all of my life. I mean, that's one of the few bad habits that I have. I smoke like that. And he said, well, you know, I remember now that when my father died, I painted a memorial painting, a little painting that has a face on it. But you know what is interesting is that I painted his pouch of tobacco and his pipe. When he died suddenly in front of me after we had an argument. You know? And I sent that to my brother. That was his pipe and his tobacco pouch in that painting that memorializes his death. Right? You say, well, fine. Of course, you will say, why an empty chair? Why will you paint an empty chair? You know, he will say, well, I don't know, that's peculiar, but the reality of it is that I collect empty chairs. Didn't I tell you that? I collect drawings and paintings of this. I have quite a collection of them. And I have done so all of my adult life. And you say, well, that's interesting. Why do you think you collect empty chairs? And you say, well, you know, I think I told you that my brother died and that in my house there was always an empty chair. That of my dead brother had my same name. I have the same name. I kind of came to take his place, but I never do it. I was born on exactly the same month, the same day, a year later. And he has written, Vincent had, it's in his letters, dozens of times about empty chairs and his collection, and how people die and left an empty chair, and how there was an empty chair in his house and all that. So clearly, he will tell you, well, I don't know, maybe the empty chair is related to death in some form or another. It certainly has my father's pouch and pipe of tobacco, and it's an empty chair. And it's my empty chair, you know. So you would say, well, that's good. What about the other chair? He said, well, that was a different chair. You know, it's a pretty looking chair. It has a cushion in there. It has a lighted candle, you know. And it has novels in there. And you say, well, what about the chair? Why that empty chair? He said, well, you know, that is easy. I bought that chair from Gauguin when he was coming to live with me at the Yellow House. I decorated his room, and you can see that in the painting. There is a carpet, there's lights, you know, There is his fan chair and there is his candle. And you will say to him, well, what about the candle? And he will laugh and say, well, I don't know. I'm not sure, you know. Candle mean many things. Gauguin was very popular with women. He could have any women that he put his eye on. So maybe the candle has something to do with that, you know. It's kind of like a penis really lighted on fire, you know. And you say, oh really? And he would say, well, but the other thing is this, don't you know, I come from a family of preachers, religious families. And the first thing that you do when somebody dies, you light a candle. You say, oh really? What do you like? What people like a candle for? You may know what it is, but you want to hear what it says. He would say, well, you know, candles are lighted when somebody dies so that the spirit can see his way. It's to lead the way of the spirit. Right? And then you say, what about the nobles that are in the chair? He said, well, I don't know. Or the books. He would say, well, I know they are nobles. You say, well, how do you know they are nobles? He say, I don't know, but that's a feeling that I have. And he would think about it. You say, you know, that's a difficult one. And then he will tell you a story that he wrote many times about, which is as follows. He would say, you know, tonight, now that you mentioned the nobles, when I was 16, my family sent me to The Hague. And I didn't like that at all. I was very anxious being by myself. And my father came to visit and spent with me 3 or 4 days. And we spent these 3 or 4 days reading novels and looking at books and things like that. And when he left, I was devastated by his leaving. I felt so terrible and so abandoned that I went to the station and looked at the train until it was lost from sight and kept looking at the whiffs of smoke coming out of the train until there was nothing else to see. But I remember the feeling. I was devastated that he was going away and that I had been sent to The Hague. So, you say, well, it seems to be empty chairs. He will tell you represent people that die. So, and one is his, one is Gauguin. And these chairs were painted about 2 weeks or so, 2 or 3 weeks before. Obviously, the arguments between Gauguin and him were growing more and more difficult. And he obviously had developed the thought of going after Gauguin and killing him. Gauguin, he will tell you when talking about his chair, Gauguin had threatened to leave. He didn't want to be there anymore. He was fed up to the back of his teeth and he wanted to leave. And Vincent would have told in his association, it reminds me when my father left and how devastated and abandoned I felt, and I so much admired this man, you know, and he just wanted to go. At that point, he may not have become quite conscious that he had the intention and will develop the thought of killing Gauguin, or he may have. He will tell you directly, that's what I thought, you know, and that's what I was represented in the paintings. More likely than not, this was preconscious or unconscious. He was not completely aware of what any of this means. So, as you see, when there is enough information and enough symbols in paintings, you can treat them as dreams. That's easy with Vincent because he wrote everything to his brother. These paintings were described to his brother in enormous detail, and he did that for 10 years and talk about everything there. What empty chair he collected, what other drawing he found of an empty chair, by whom, many reference to death and religious things and things of that kind, and to his brother and the pain of the loss of his brother, and how he was kind of obliged all through his life to go and see people mourning children that they lost that he didn't know. He may tell you that in his associations as well, possibly. So you can reconstruct a lot of things. And as you see, obviously with many other paintings you cannot do that because you don't have any information. You just have the painting and maybe you can play with symbols a little bit, but that's very uncertain. Here you have a lot of information for any one of the objects that are placed in this painting, including the chairs. So you know what it is, you know what they were for, you know what he did, and so you pretty well can reconstruct a lot of things. And as you see, these dreams of two paintings, if you consider them a dream, open vistas that it will take you months or years to get to. And that's the advantage of dreams, that they bring memories from anywhere in the past to the present and link the present with the past. As you know, and as I said the other day here, the mind, or the brain rather, in some form, the mind, is like an enormous fisherman net, you know, literally hundreds of miles long, where everything, you know how the net is, yeah? Things are interwoven, and so this knot is a mile away from another knot, but if you go through the knot, you get from this knot to that knot. That's what free associations are. That's the process of free association. You have a patient free associate, and he jumped from this to another knot in that fisherman net, which is the mind, and another knot and another knot, and you don't know how far he's going to go or how many memories he's going to recover that he might never told you unless he had that dream. That opens vistas very quickly that will take a long time to find in any other way. In any case, let me show you the consequences of what happened. That is a portrait of Vincent with his ear cut. You can see the bandage there. And that's him shortly after the incident. Later on, if you want to, I'll tell you a little more about that painting. That painting is an original, but there is another painting similar to that that is in fact a copy, and it's at the Washington. It's in Washington at the National Gallery, and it's not really a true original, but at least his nephew, which I met and knew was the greatest expert there ever was on Van Gogh, had been called to look at the paintings and give his opinion. He was considered the greatest authority on Van Gogh. He played with his paintings when he was a child. He said they were underneath my bed everywhere. I made castles with them, houses with them, and so on when I was a little boy, and so I know them very well. I'll tell you a little more about it later. So that's a portrait with the ear cut, of which there is more than one version, but that's certainly one of them. This was the beginning of 1889 and led to his being hospitalized in a mental institution called St. Remy on 5 different occasions during the following year. He was very sick with many delusional ideas, including paranoid concerns about being poisoned and religious abhorrent delusions, which concern God and the Virgin Mary and obscene kind of thoughts about the Virgin and things of that kind, which tormented him tremendously because he was a very religious man. And he has a strong suicidal ideation at that time. Nevertheless, some of his most beautiful paintings come from this time. He was allowed to paint, and I show you some of the, that's the gardens at the mental institution here. There you are. And these are the gardens he painted there while he was hospitalized there. This is an interesting painting. I told you about the cage, and this is called Prisoner's Frown. And this is people in a prison that are doing exercise, going around, and as you see, it's a cage. And this is Van Gogh. That's Van Gogh's face there, in the cage that I described to you before. It's an interesting kind of painting. This is from the same period, and what is interesting, some of his best paintings, certainly the most valuable ones, come from this period. And as you see here, everything swirls, is swirling around. It has an enormous power and impact on the viewer, you know. This stream swirling around is new, is after he went to St. Remy's. Let me show you some more. This is an old man in sorrow. It's probably a depiction of the way he felt at that particular point in time. And this is one of the most famous paintings he ever did. It's known by everybody. This is Starry Night, perhaps his best known work. It was done at St. Remy in 1889. He had less than a year to live at this time. And these, you know, as you know, have been popularized by songs and about Vincent Van Gogh and Starry Night and so on, which are all very interesting and moving. The next year, this is 1890 now, feeling better, he visited his brother, his new wife, and his little nephew. And he painted when his little nephew was born, while he was in the hospital. He was a few weeks old, the boy, when he visited his nephew. He painted this little paint to give it to his nephew as a memento of his nephew's birth. He always memorialized things. He was on his way, he was feeling better. He visited his brother, his new wife, and his little nephew. He was on his way to the village of Auvers, just outside Paris, where Theo had arranged for Dr. Gaucher to take care of him. Dr. Gaucher was not a psychiatrist, he was a cardiologist. That's Dr. Gaucher. I have to tell you a little bit about what illness did he have? What was it that made him do the things that he did that required 5 hospitalizations? The citizens at Arles, with the Yellow House, went to the mayor of the city and requested that he be removed from there and sent to a hospital because he was crazy. Now, in those days, we didn't make diagnosis as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. That was not even in the horizon at that particular time. You just were a lunatic, and you were sent to one of these places. Well, there are many possibilities. One is, as I told you, he had syphilis. And syphilis, sometimes, it's very rare to see that now, but in the past it was a very common development of syphilis. It was called tertiary syphilis, and it's called general progressive paralysis. And essentially what it did is that created a certain type of tissue and destroyed tissues anywhere in the body. Your brain, if it was in your optic nerve, you will be blind. If it was in your brain, you may well become deranged and things of that kind. Those of you that are young, we hardly have ever seen anything like that because syphilis is treatable now. But that is so since the advent of penicillin. Before that, this was a common disorder, and it tended to happen a little later than 10 years. But some people got there as early as that. Did he have that? Did he have tertiary syphilis and progressive general paralysis? Possibly. Second possibility, he drank a lot of absinthe, which is a toxic, alcoholic drug that was beverage that was at that time popular, and people drank it until it was realized that it damaged your brain, and a lot of people went bananas if they drank a great deal of it for a certain amount of time. That's a second possibility. I did know his nephew, as I told you. I visited him in Leiden. I used to be a professor at the Leiden University, a visiting professor, and I will fly from London every Friday to Leiden and come back on Monday. And so I had an opportunity to meet his nephew that was very friendly to the analysts in Amsterdam, and so they introduced me to him knowing that I was writing a book on him. He was a delightful man, and he gave me a lot of information, including the fact that there was serious mental illness in the family, and one sister of Vincent Van Gogh, the painter, and aunt of his nephew, had been in a mental institution for most of his life since she became an adult. In fact, she outlived everybody. She lived something like 80-some years in a mental institution and was deranged. He said he was crazy and was crazy all this time. What did that mean? I don't know. Was she a schizophrenic? Was she had a bipolar disorder that had no treatment in those days? And I don't know. It's very difficult to say, but the fact is that there was mental illness, and that is another possibility. It's very difficult to be sure of whatever it is that it was. Now, there was at Albert a large colony of artists, and Vincent's work was very much admired by fellow artists and students. By July 1890, Vincent became very depressed. The reason for that was, remember, Theo was his only source of support. Well, Theo was sick, very sick, when Vincent went to visit him in Paris. Theo had married a year earlier, and now there was a little nephew, and Vincent felt that Theo couldn't possibly cope with all of this obligation. So he became very, very depressed, let alone that Theo, that was very close to him, now has a wife and a son, and he again probably felt quite abandoned. So Theo's health had deteriorated, as I mentioned, and his ability to continue supporting his brother financially was compromised. Vincent felt the burden to his brother and his new family. He then went and borrowed a gun from a neighbor with the excuse of frightening the crows in the field, and went and shot himself after he finished that particular painting. That was in 1890. That's the painting that he was doing when he shot himself. Theo went immediately to his brother. Vincent said to him, quote, that one could not imagine that there was so much sorrow in life, end of quote. He then added, quote, I wish I could die now, end of quote. A few moments later, his wish was granted and he was freed of his misery. It was July 29 of 1890. He was 37 years old. He was only 37 years old. Yeah, ironically, shortly before his death, he has exhibited at the Beanstags in Paris, where his work has been very much admired. Furthermore, an important article about his paintings appeared in the Mercure de France. He was flattered and disturbed by it, and it seems as if the circle closed. Not being able any longer to destroy his work as he had done in his childhood, he destroyed himself. In the short 7 years that he was a painter, he had produced 900 paintings, of which only one was sold during his lifetime for 100 francs, and that was to the sister of a painter by the name of Bernard, that was a friend of him and admired of Vincent Van Gogh. In contrast, 2 years ago, one of his paintings, one of the irises, which I show you later, sold in auction for close to $62.5 million. This is the highest ever paid price for an artwork. It beat Rembrandt, it beat any other painter in the world, the great masters. It doesn't matter. There's one similar to that. $62.5 million. Remarkable. Theo, that's his brother Theo, Was a broken man after his brother's suicide. His illness took a turn for the worse. His own mental equilibrium gave way, and he followed his brother to death only 6 months later. Theo was 33 years old at this point. Now they lie side by side in the cemetery at Auvers, where, taking his brother with him, Vincent has risen to immortality. When I published the book, the popularity of the artist had continued to increase. I wrote this new introduction in one of the many editions that the book had gone through. So I wrote, since the publication of this book, the popularity of the artist continued to increase exponentially. Vincent Van Gogh is today a household name that has achieved nearly universal recognition. His fame acknowledges his artistic value and his uniqueness as an extraordinarily gifted and tormented human being. His paintings have broken all price records and surpassed the value of works by the great masters, including Rembrandt. Some years ago, the Potato Eaters and 2 other of his paintings were stolen from the Kröller-Mühlen National Museum in Otterlo, in Holland. No one dared to assess its worth, yet everyone agreed that it is a priceless work of art. As to this book, I said here, it pleases me to say that the reading public has received it well. Furthermore, it seems to appear regularly in the bibliography of any major work of Vincent van Gogh. Let me show you a few more things. That's the Potato Eaters, the one that goes stolen. It's priceless. Nobody can price it. This is from early times in Vincent's painting, when he was using a very dark palette, like it was the style of the Dutch painters of that time. Of course, he later became an impressionist, and then the colors completely changed. There are a couple of 2 of the Potato Eaters paintings. This is a peasant's house. You can see the peasants here. He was very interested in peasants and peasants' life and so on. It's a beautiful painting, actually, if you see the original. This is a landscape, probably outside Auvers somewhere. It's not as colorful here because you lose in the translation to PowerPoint. You lose a lot of the color. These are incredibly colorful. You know, his yellows are dramatic. Let me show you another one. This is a little alley in Auvers where he killed himself, where Gautier lived. And this one was painted while he was at St. Remy in the asylum, and he was concerned, very obsessed with religious themes. And this is the sword, which is a biblical, common religious theme. This is a self-portrait of him while he was at the asylum. You see the same whirling things all over the place, in this particular painting. And this last one that I will show you is a beautiful painting, and it's called Souvenir de Mauve. This man was a painter that was married to a relative of him that had helped Vincent and given him some lessons in terms of painting and helped him with paintings and canvas and so on. And when he died, he painted this again as a memorial and sent it to the family in his name and Theo's name. I think that's about what I wanted to tell you for today.